What you're about to hear is not just a speech, it's a wake-up call. For years, we've been told a version of the story, one side always right, one side always righteous. But behind the headlines, behind the politics, something far greater is unfolding. A silent collapse that the world refuses to acknowledge. The fall of a power that thought itself untouchable is already in motion. This isn't about hate, it's about truth. This isn't about taking sides, it's about opening eyes. From the streets of Tel Aviv to the resistance lines in Gaza, from broken alliances to rising voices across the globe, this is the full picture, unfiltered and unapologetic. Stay with us till the end, because once you hear this, you'll never see the world the same again. Internal political division is one of the most defining cracks in the foundation of Israel's current crisis. Once regarded as a relatively stable democracy in a volatile region, Israel is now facing its most severe internal unrest in decades. The source of this turmoil is not external threats, but deep ideological and structural fractures from within. At the center of this division is the controversial judicial overhaul introduced by Prime Minister Netanyahu's far-right government. These reforms aim to weaken the power of the judiciary, giving the ruling coalition unprecedented control over legal institutions. What followed was an eruption of public outrage, bringing hundreds of thousands of Israelis, liberals, former military leaders, tech workers, and even reservists into the streets. Protests have surged across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem, not sporadically but in relentless waves, week after week, and so oftentimes, not once, but often leading to careful, liberal presences in the city. Liberals, former military leaders, tech workers, and even reservists. These aren't just minor skirmishes of disagreement. They reflect a deep existential battle over the very nature of the Israeli state. Beyond legal reforms, there's a growing identity crisis. Secular Israelis are increasingly at odds with the ultra-Orthodox population, which is growing rapidly in number and political influence. This divide touches every aspect of society, from military service, where ultra-Orthodox men are largely exempt, to education, gender rights, and public funding. As religious parties push for more control and the imposition of religious values on secular society, tensions rise. Meanwhile, within the government itself, coalition partners are frequently in conflict, operating more as factions than as a united leadership. This dysfunction breeds instability and leaves the state paralyzed on key decisions. Even the military, long seen as Israel's most cohesive institution, is showing signs of internal dissent. High-ranking reservists have refused to serve under what they see as authoritarian threats to democracy, marking an unprecedented breach in military unity. This domestic instability is amplified by rising ethnic tensions, particularly with Palestinian citizens of Israel, who make up over 20% of the population. Discrimination, marginalization, and heavy-handed policing have fueled resentment and protests within these communities as well. All of this is happening while the nation faces pressure from outside forces, creating a perfect storm. The once unshakable sense of national unity, built through shared security threats and collective identity, is dissolving under the weight of political chaos, religious polarization, and social fragmentation. The image of Israel as an unshakable military force is beginning to crack under the weight of reality. For decades, its power was rooted in a doctrine of overwhelming retaliations, elite intelligence operations, and cutting-edge defense systems. The world viewed Israel's army as a model of precision and strength. But recent developments have exposed alarming weaknesses. Iran's direct missile and drone strikes unprecedented in their scope, managed to reach Israeli territory, sending a clear message: the era of untouchable borders is over. Despite Israel's reliance on the Iron Dome, several missiles breached its defenses, raising serious questions about the effectiveness of its most celebrated shield. On Israel's northern front, Hezbollah has steadily increased its pressure through calculated rocket attacks and tactical probes. These aren't mere provocations, they're stress tests. What's deeply concerning is Israel's hesitation to fully retaliate. That hesitation, whether strategic or forced by external limitations, projects uncertainty rather than strength. In the south, the Gaza Strip remains a constant battleground. Despite numerous campaigns and airstrikes, Palestinian resistance groups such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad have not only survived, they've adapted. Their use of tunnels, homemade rockets, and coordinated responses reflects a growing military maturity that defies the decades-old narrative of Israel's invincibility. Internally, the cracks are even deeper. The Israeli military, once a unifying symbol across political lines, is now fractured by dissent. Thousands of reservists have threatened to withdraw service, particularly in protest against government overreach and judicial reforms. Even elite units, pilots, intelligence officers, special forces have spoken out, warning that their loyalty to democracy outweighs loyalty to any single administration. This dissent within the ranks, once unthinkable, reveals a growing disillusionment that undermines operational readiness. Adding to this vulnerability is the growing sophistication of Israel's adversaries. Iran's regional allies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi militias are more coordinated than ever, increasingly sharing intelligence, technology, and tactics. With each passing conflict, these groups test Israel's limits, learning how to bypass its surveillance, exploit its delays, and stretch its forces thin across multiple fronts. The traditional model of deterrence through superior firepower is no longer sustainable. These are not isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a deeper strategic erosion, where military dominance is no longer enough to ensure control, nor capable of securing lasting peace. Loss of global sympathy represents one of the most dramatic shifts in Israel's standing on the world stage. For much of its modern existence, Israel enjoyed widespread sympathy from Western governments and societies, rooted in its identity as a democratic nation established in the aftermath of the Holocaust. That moral capital, however, is now rapidly eroding. A new generation, connected by social media and more globally conscious than ever, is witnessing firsthand the realities on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank. Graphic images of destroyed homes, injured children, and displaced families circulate instantly, creating a raw and unfiltered narrative that contradicts official statements. These images do not fade quickly. They linger in the minds of millions, fostering a new sense of urgency, anger, and moral clarity across diverse audiences. The shift is particularly evident in academic institutions, cultural spaces, and grassroots political movements. University campuses, once neutral or silent, have become vocal battlegrounds of protest, with student bodies organizing walkouts, divestment campaigns, and petitions demanding an end to uncritical support for Israel. Artists, athletes, and public intellectuals are also breaking their silence, refusing to perform, compete, or collaborate with Israeli institutions in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. These are not fringe voices. They represent influential cultural currents that are reshaping public perception across Europe, North America, and beyond. Even in diplomatic circles, changes are surfacing. Resolutions condemning Israeli settlements and military actions are gaining broader support in the United Nations, and several governments have begun to reconsider their arms deals and aid packages. Countries that once stood firmly behind Israel are now calling for investigations into alleged war crimes and human rights violations. The moral high ground that Israel once claimed is slipping away as critics point to decades of occupation, systemic inequality, and disproportionate military responses. This decline in sympathy also extends to Jewish communities in the diaspora, particularly among younger generations who are increasingly uncomfortable aligning their identity with a state whose actions they see as contradictory to the values of justice, equality, and peace. As these voices grow louder, they weaken the once monolithic support Israel could rely on abroad. The result is not just a PR crisis, it's a profound loss of legitimacy. When global sympathy fades, so too does the unchallenged support that has long protected Israel from meaningful consequences, exposing it to greater political, legal, and economic vulnerabilities. Economic and social instability illustrates the internal decay that often precedes the collapse of a state's influence. Israel, once dubbed the startup nation for its booming tech sector and entrepreneurial spirit, is now grappling with growing financial uncertainty and widening social divides. The political crisis triggered by judicial reforms and ideological clashes has sent shockwaves through the economy, shaking investor confidence. Major companies and tech firms, previously proud symbols of Israeli innovation, have started moving assets abroad or halting expansion within the country. Venture capital, once abundant, is drying up as international investors grow wary of political instability and a judiciary system seen as compromise. The Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has experienced significant volatility, and the Israeli shekel has weakened against global currencies, signaling deeper economic distress. Inflation is rising, and the cost of living continues to soar, affecting the average citizen's quality of life. Housing prices have become unsustainable for much of the population, and essential services like healthcare and education are facing budget strains. Economic pressure is most intense on marginalized communities, especially Palestinian citizens of Israel and those in the occupied territories, where poverty and unemployment are rampant. The growing economic gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling lower class is fueling resentment and protests, creating fertile ground for social unrest. Social instability is also worsening due to the demographic and ideological divides within Israeli society. Secular Israelis and the ultra-Orthodox community are increasingly clashing over military exemptions, public funding, and civil liberties. The ultra-Orthodox population is growing rapidly, yet contributes disproportionately less to the workforce and military service, creating tensions over resource distribution and national responsibility. At the same time, far-right settler movements are emboldened, leading to more violent confrontations and a climate of impunity that further alienates Palestinian citizens. This internal friction is deepened by the ongoing conflict with Palestinians in the occupied territories. Every round of violence not only drains military resources, but also carries a massive economic toll, disrupting tourism, trade, and infrastructure. International boycotts and divestment campaigns are also beginning to make an impact, especially in academic and cultural sectors. As social trust erodes and economic anxiety grows, the state's ability to maintain cohesion weakens. The unity that once defined Israeli resilience is being replaced by a fragmented society where fear, inequality, and economic decline are steadily chipping away at its foundations. Diplomatic isolation marks a significant turn in Israel's geopolitical position, one that could have lasting consequences for its national security and international legitimacy. For many years, Israel was able to rely on a strong network of global allies, particularly the United States and several European nations, who consistently offered diplomatic protection in international forums, military aid, and political backing. That protective shield is now showing serious signs of erosion. Countries that once offered near unconditional support are beginning to question their stance, as Israeli policies, especially in Gaza and the West Bank, are increasingly viewed as aggressive and out of step with international law. Within institutions like the United Nations, Israel is facing growing condemnation, with more countries supporting resolutions against its settlement expansion, military conduct, and human rights record. The momentum of the Abraham Accords, once celebrated as a breakthrough in Israeli-Arab relations, is slowing dramatically. While the deals with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan were seen as a strategic diplomatic win, recent escalations in Gaza and settler violence in the West Bank have created public backlash in those very countries. Governments that normalize relations are now facing pressure from their populations to reassess those ties, especially as the death toll among Palestinians rises and images of suffering circulate globally. This tension places Israel in a precarious position where even new allies may become temporary or conditional partners rather than lasting strategic friends. In addition, the rise of multipolarity in the global order has shifted the dynamics of international diplomacy. Powers like China, Russia, Iran, and even Turkey are gaining influence in the Middle East, often positioning themselves in opposition to Western-backed Israeli narratives. The expansion of BRICS and the increased cooperation among global South nations have further isolated Israel, particularly in forums where Western vetoes are not a factor. As these blocs grow stronger and more unified, Israel finds itself surrounded by regional adversaries and a changing international community that is less willing to overlook its domestic and foreign policy actions. Moreover, the internal divisions within the United States, the cornerstone of Israel's foreign support, are now spilling into foreign policy debates. Members of Congress, civil society leaders, and segments of the Jewish diaspora are voicing unprecedented criticism. The once solid bipartisan support in Washington is beginning to fracture, with younger generations of voters and lawmakers challenging the blank check approach to aid and arms sales. This diplomatic shift is not just a short-term setback, but a slow unraveling of the global legitimacy Israel has relied on for decades. The rise of unified resistance signals a strategic transformation in the regional balance of power that directly challenges Israel's long-standing dominance. For decades, one of Israel's greatest advantages was the fragmentation of the Palestinian cause. Internal political rivalries, ideological splits, and territorial divisions had historically weakened the ability of Palestinians and their allies to form a cohesive front. However, that dynamic is now changing in a significant way. Various resistance factions, from Hamas in Gaza to Islamic Jihad and groups in the West Bank, are increasingly coordinating their responses, strategies, and political messaging. This emerging unity reflects a shared sense of purpose and urgency, especially in response to Israeli military actions, settlement expansion, and occupation policies that affect all Palestinian territories. Beyond the Palestinian landscape, there is also a clear regional alignment that is deepening in support of the resistance. Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and several militias in Iraq and Syria are now acting with more coordination and strategic alignment than in previous years. These groups are not only vocal in their condemnation of Israeli actions, but are also engaging militarily, economically, and politically to challenge Israel's influence in the region. Iran's support in the form of weapons, intelligence, and training has significantly boosted the capabilities of groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, making them more capable of sustained resistance, not just sporadic attacks. These actors are also leveraging asymmetrical warfare tactics that are increasingly effective against conventional Israeli military responses. The rise of social media and digital communication platforms has further amplified this unity. Narratives of resistance are shared instantly across borders, galvanizing public support from populations in Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, and beyond. Online campaigns, viral footage of Israeli raids, and real-time updates from conflict zones are not only raising awareness, but also building a sense of transnational solidarity that transcends state borders. This unity is no longer just military. It is ideological, cultural, and emotional. As this network of resistance grows stronger and more sophisticated, Israel's ability to isolate and neutralize individual threats is significantly reduced. No longer dealing with a single group or localized conflict, it now faces a regional web of adversaries. This evolution marks a turning point in the struggle, where resistance is no longer reactive and scattered but organized, patient and strategically assertive in ways that challenge the very core of Israel's security doctrine. What we are witnessing is not the sudden collapse of a state, but the unraveling of an illusion of invincibility, of untouchable power, of moral righteousness that no longer holds under the weight of truth. Israel's foundation is shaking not because of one strike, one protest, or one policy, but because of a deep and collective awakening. Its internal divisions have cracked its unity. Its military dominance has been challenged. The sympathy it once held has turned to scrutiny. The economy it once boasted of is faltering. Allies are stepping back, and in the shadows of resistance, a new force is rising. Unified, unwavering, and morally clear. The collapse isn't loud like an explosion. It's quiet like erosion. It begins at the edges and then reaches the core, and that core is now exposed. This moment is not about celebrating downfall. It's about revealing consequences. When justice is denied, when oppression becomes policy, and when fear replaces diplomacy, collapse becomes inevitable. What stands now is not a question of if, but how long. Let this not be a time for vengeance, but for vision. Let the world remember no state, no army, no regime, no matter how powerful, can escape the judgment of time and the rising voice of truth. To everyone listening, thank you for giving your time, your heart, and your mind. Stay informed, stay conscious, and stay courageous in speaking truth, even when the world stays silent. You are not just witnesses, you are voices that echo beyond borders. Good luck in your journey of awareness, justice, and unwavering purpose. Peace be upon you all.